It's not too frequently that I've seen that a workplace training comes out and there's a disclaimer that says the employer doesn't actually support the information that is in the content of the training. So this one's going to be an interesting one, folks. Here a while back, we had training that was going out every month, and that ceased, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But towards the end, some critical thinking training had gone out, and I got a great response. People were telling me they wanted to see more training that was like that, and so this is a continuation of that, but those were YouTube videos, and this is a custom critical thinking training. So here we go. Uncommon sense for your consideration only. Hey, it's training you don't even have to retain. It's not a safety rule or something you got to follow or do. This is just for consideration, folks. So we are going to be exploring with general semantics, and I'm about to tell you what general semantics is, but this is potentially the first training in a series, and it depends on what the feedback I receive is on whether or not we're going to kind of continue with this or move in a different direction. So please do take time to fill out the survey. It's not a quiz this time, but a survey, and I really, really need the information I'm going to ask because it's going to affect a lot of things moving forward. I'll repeat that towards the end of this training. So we are going to be using some concepts and tools from a system of thought to examine some concerns from the fiscal year 2025 engagement survey. One of those concerns is how much time is the right amount of time to spend with patrons. And the other one is a kind of overview of the compensation plan and how that system relates to concerns that were expressed in the engagement survey. So you may have heard of semantics before. Frequently people, if they have someone who uses a synonym, but kind of in a way that it makes something sound worse than it really is, and be like, oh, that's just semantics, that kind of thing. And so here's the definition of that, and it's a field that's important, but it's not what we're talking about today, because general semantics is a system of mental training that was described in the book Science and Sanity, which was published in 1933. In that handbook of general semantics, Science and Sanity, the author Alfred Korzybski begins with a question. And this question is, this was written in 1933 now, why do people suck when we got such cool stuff? So he's looking at all of the physics and science and different advancements that were being made in the early 20th century and asking, why do we have the same problems then, back in 2,000 years ago, when we've got all these other fields that are advancing? And it's true, I mean, you're looking at a screen right now. This data flew in on beams of light through little optic fiber tubes, and here it is on a screen, and it's fantastic technology. Probably went to space and back. Who knows where this data went to get to you. But, people still use it for some pretty silly stuff. And we really do have wars, all the problems, hate, everything that might have been eliminated in cultural advancement, where a lot of the mistakes of, things like the humors and the ether and elements and all that kind of stuff was ancient thought. That's gone, and yet we're still working with the same kind of society as we were back when they were being, back when those were the main ideas. And so, taking a break right here to say, why are you having to take this training? You might ask. And how does it apply to your job? Well, critical thinking training, in my opinion, is a great fit for a library, because one of the tasks of a library is to deliver good information to people. And we're living in a time when, and maybe have always been living in a time when, the decision to say something or not is biased in itself, in a way where a statement is something that could be said or might not have been said. And so even if it's presented in a neutral way, it's still drawing attention to something because there's a mountain of information. So with it's unfeasible to look at all the information that's available to us. So when something's brought to your attention, it's done so in a deliberate way. And so back in the day, you'd get a credible source of information and that would be it. You'd be like, I've checked 2 sources. This looks like good information. Both sources are credible. They're, the New York Times and whatever else, some kind of recognized magazine authority, journal, those kinds of things, and validated it against a second source of information. So here's an answer for you to a question. And that's getting rather harder to do as time moves on. Kids really benefit from critical thinking skills, and it's kind of easy to see why. If you're not answering patron questions all the time, working smarter, not harder is great for everybody. The brain is like any other part of the body. You got to keep using that thing to keep it ready. And so I threw this in here. Sharpen the Saw is one of those 7 habits by Stephen Covey, and whatever else you think about him. It's true, when people stop using their minds, then it does not lead to sharper intellect here. And then there's always going to be innumerable other reasons. There's always more. And there's always additional kind of like reasons and benefits you can experience from doing critical thinking training. All right, so before we get into the specific topics that we're going to be examining, we are going to go over some history, and then we're going to move into the second part of this training where we're going to talk about concepts, and then we'll be moving on from there to the actual evaluation. Okay, so this is going to be my attempt at all of the history of Western, I guess all of the relevant history of Western education and modern English in 5 minutes. Okay, so in 384 to 322 BC, there lived a philosopher in Greece named Aristotle. Now, this guy had a lot of notions that he wrote down, and that was kind of rare. And it's rare that those kinds of manuscripts survive. But this is a thinker that was highly regarded in his time, highly regarded now. There's some artwork here in the center of the page from the 13th century, and so this has been kind of a subject of these 2 people. So Aristotle, he got hired on to be a 13-year-old kid's tutor, 13-year-old kid. And he taught him, I guess, a lot of what he knew about reason and philosophy and all of the other subjects that he would need. And so that little boy, that 13-year-old, took that information and considered it, and then became Alexander the Great. That's right, y'all. This kid is in these pictures with Aristotle because he is Alexander the Great. He created an empire, conquered all of this area here in the East, over in Europe, and it was quite a life. From this right here says Alexander's Empire 323 BCE, so this is the year after Aristotle passed. Okay, so the knowledge this kid acquired, Alexander, he took that across the region and spread those ideas in a lot of different ways. And that was the beginning of kind of the spread of Greek philosophy out into basically that's where it started to spread across the world. All right. So while this is going on, okay, so this is just a few years later, 395, there were barbarians who were like different linguistic backgrounds, but in the continent, primarily Germanic speaking or Proto-Germanic speaking peoples. And then in the Roman Empire, of course, Latin speaking peoples. And then coming from we're really concerned with the British Isles here. And as you can see, like people who speak Celtic languages were coming in. And you see there's a number of arrows that mix over there. Well, it was a mashup of these different languages eventually. And so you had some Celtic words, some Latin words from the influence that had spread. You had some Germanic words primarily, with the Germanic structure primarily. And it became, the language they used, this mix that turned into Old English. Okay? So now we're in the Dark Ages. And they're called out for a reason, y'all. You probably already know. Now, we don't know that too much about it. I mean, there's things, Charlemagne and these kinds of figures that were alive and active around, year 1000 and stuff. But there's a lot of development that happened as these tribes moved around. And then they started to develop into different, societies, all of that. And then the Norman conquest of England happened. All right? So we're talking about 1066. So these Roman ideas through Greece. So here come a bunch of people speak Old Norman, French. These are French speakers, okay? And so they conquer England, all right? And so everybody in England speaks this Germanic mashup, Germanic, Celtic, little bit of Latin kind of mashup. Here comes the French-speaking folk, and they smash into them, take them over, and the language that is the language of the courts and of all official business in Britain is French. All right? So, William the Conqueror here has made it on you can see, lands in September 1066. My understanding is that William the Conqueror never learned how to speak English. We're dealing with Old English here, but the French smashes into the English, and then those, for many years, go on to develop. So time passes on, and the French and the Old English, they mix together, turn into Middle English, and then they advance, and they become early modern English, okay? Right around 1600, this is in the era of Shakespeare and the era of when the King James Bible was written, all of those things. These are rather old documents, but not really. I mean, they're 400 years old, and they're legible, right? They're things that we can look at and we can understand. Well, something else had happened while these languages are mingling together, and people who speak Old English are learning how to speak French to survive. Here comes a system of education from the East. Okay, and so this is going into medieval universities, supported by the church at the time. This system of education, which is called classical education now, and it was divided into a number of subjects, 3 of which were considered elementary and everyone needed to learn. Those 3 were grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And the logic was Aristotelian logic. And these ideas in the body of work that Aristotle had been able to leave, but more importantly had spread because of Alexander the Great. They've now made their way over into Western Europe, and through the official support of the church at the time, they're becoming, these are the people who are running the educational institutions in a lot of cases. This type of thinking, the logic of Aristotle, is becoming standard. And so if you had a different opinion, like try to make a scientific advancement, there's a good chance that because the church had a dogmatic opinion on many of these subjects covered by Aristotle, that you could be labeled a heretic, which happened. So this is the guy most recently, 1600, not too long ago, was burned at the stake for having non-Aristotelian ideas that he was promoting. These were about the cosmology, and specifically, it was a heliocentric cosmology. So moving away from what Aristotle thought, which was that the planets and sun and everything else moves around the Earth's center of the universe, which was the official church position adopted from the philosophy of Aristotle. This person was saying, hey, it appears to be true that the Earth is not the center of the universe, that the Earth is actually moving around the sun. And so they just burned him at the stake for it. I'm sure there was a lot of other reasons, but this was, the heresy that history tells us Giordano Bruno was executed for. So that's in 1600. What you see on your left is a page from the typescript of the first folio, which was the first collection of Shakespearean plays collected after Shakespeare's death, okay? And you can see how far English has come at this point, because you can pretty much read this. It's weird because it's got some typescript things and spelling, but this is that famous to be or not to be speech. This guy on the right's being burned at the stake, and the people who were telling him, the people in the Roman Inquisition and the people standing around are speaking understandable English. That's how far the influence of Aristotle reached for 1,600 years, even more. I guess that would have been 1,900 years. Somebody's getting burned at the stake for not following it, all because of this progression of information moving from Greece across Europe into Rome and then across onto the British Isles. Maybe you already know some of the things from a class that Aristotle claimed and that were parts of his philosophy, and maybe you don't. You don't need to, because what we're really doing, this is the first of our activities, okay? So this is something to consider only. On the next couple of pages, there is going to be quotes from the writings, translated, of course, from Greek, the writings of Aristotle, okay? And what I would like for you to do is to take a moment on each page, and I'll give some commentary, and just consider it. So this sounds bad, right? And this is about considering credibility here. It sounds bad, and you know why? Because it is bad. This guy hated women. He wrote this in a book, and it's not like out of context, because I didn't want to make that mistake, and so I looked up the actual context. He had this whole system worked out where, it's a scientific gender differences, so to speak, scientific kind of like racial science type of thing. But this is from 350 BCE, this writing, and it's spread. Now let me ask you this. If people were getting burned at the stake for going against Aristotelian ideas in 1600, and this is among those ideas, how did we get here today? Only some of the things that Aristotle had to say about slavery. He thought it was natural and that some people were naturally enslaved. And this is, again, we're hitting 1600 here, 400 years ago. And there's someone who's being burned by the church at the time, at the stake, for going against other ideas that are similarly related in as much as that cosmological ideas don't really have a direct connection per se with religious thought, but it had become so as these ideas were being used as dogma in the church to perpetuate culture. So this is 400 years ago. Hamlet's being performed on stage. This is the way that people think, and this is like the most educated people are being taught this stuff in schools. So this leads us to introducing a subject that is specifically criticized in Science and Sanity as limiting our cultural advancement. These are the laws of thought that apply to all Aristotelian thought, and specifically are included in logic, which you may have already known that classical education like when continued into the 20th century. So people are learning these notions, perhaps not the ones on the previous screens, but these ideas, and they're becoming like the foundation of educated reasoning here. The principle of identity, everything is the same as itself and different from another. And then it's got the citation here. So this is saying that what's true is true. If something exists, it exists. And it's a thing. Everything is the same as itself and different from another. All right. The principle of contradiction is it's impossible to be the same thing, to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing in the same respect. So it's impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. If something is false, it's false. It's impossible for something to be true and false at the same time and in the same respect. Principle of contradiction here. It is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing in the same respect. Okay? Now this is the foundation of knowledge here in classical education. And what that means is something can't be, if something's false, it's false. If something is something other than what it is, it's not that thing. Okay? And it's worded like this, translated probably very directly from the Greek, who knows? But that's the idea here. The principle of contradiction is that something that is false, and something that not is something is not something. So something that is something, something that's not something is not something, okay? And so what you see, what is something is, it is that. And if it's not that, it's not that. All right. Now, the principle of excluded middle. There cannot be an intermediate between contradictories, but one subject we must either affirm or deny any one predicate. Okay? So, this is all quite fancy ways of saying, hey, something can be true or it can be false, but it can't be both. And when you're making a predicate statement, so like making a logical statement, it's going to be, is this true? Yes or no? Is it false? Yes or no? And it can't be both true and false at the same time. Okay? And so this is from a time from before, microscopic particles were discovered. This is a time when you looked at something and you should be able to have knowledge about it. That's the kind of metaphysical approach. So involving metaphysics involves reality. And so this is saying when you see something and it is that thing, it is that thing. If you see something and it is not that, it's not that, and it can't be both. Okay? Can't be neither, I guess, also. So I thought I'd boil these down right here. Now, this is original work, even though, so John Locke would later go on to say, regarding the principle of identity, he would define it as what is. What is, comma, is. And so let's take this Aristotelian thought and boil it down. It is what it is. It ain't what it ain't. And it can't be both. All right? Now, I know that this is sounding like the Ron Burgundy of philosophy right here, but people still think this way. People take this seriously, and it is an either or. It's either this or that. Now think, it makes sense that if something's true, it's true. If something's false, it's false, and it can't be true and false. And something is something, or it's not. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because that's the programming that has been perpetuated for the last 2,000 years. And is that what reality is like? Can you think from a history where these have been the foundational ideas that have been institutionalized? Why now, when reality is, being revealed in a number of different ways, and people who are in power, let's say, they've got a commitment to these ideas. They say, if something is this, it's either this or it's either this or that. It's not this and that. It's not neither this nor that. This is the kind of application that you can see that there is certainty. And now, why is it important for a group that's empowered to keep people feeling like there's certainty? Well, you're either a Republican or a Democrat, or you're either a liberal or a conservative, or and on and on and on. You're a male or a female. These are the kinds of things that go along with this line of thinking and cannot be separated from it. And it is a notion that we can see every day. So I'm going to just take a second and say, one of the other managers, I was talking to him about this, and he had a great observation. This is why people don't understand quantum superposition. This is why people have difficulty with real effects, like grasping things, is because everyone has been trained in this, and there's a lot more to it, a lot of implications for this set of rules to be problematic. A set of rules where something is black or it's white, and whether or not that represents reality. As the time went on, it became a axiomatic kind of thought. So kind of like assumed. We got some axiomatic thoughts coming up for ourselves. One thing I did want to point out here, though, is that, in philosophy classes, all those kinds of things, very beginning philosophy 101, whatever, you're going to see some Aristotelian documents, training, stuff like that. And, it's perpetuated in that way and culturally, but also the name Aristotle is a famous name. And so what that means in these times is that that's being leveraged. So there are quite a few books and people talking about Aristotelian thought and skipping over the parts that kind of work against the credibility of it. And this kind of thinking in particular is the underlying kind of foundations of those thoughts, and it's insidious. There's a number of books out. We've got some children's books. This one, Aristotle and Taylor Swift. Here we go. That book, Aristotle's Guide to Self-Persuasion, that came out, I think, in May, something like that, 2025, maybe even later than that. There's children's books, and as we head towards the end of part one, just consider all this. All right, time for some general semantics concepts. So, what are our alternative ideas? Let's jump in here. These are things from ideas from Science and Sanity and part of general semantics as a system. It's only a few, really scratching the surface. There's a lot of other stuff, and I'll mention that again later. We're working with some axioms here. So these are things that I think is safe to say. Information transfers from one person to another through communication. Every form of communication, okay? People are making information and then sending it to someone else. It's that simple. There's no trick here or double speak or anything like that. But this is not taken for granted in Science and Sanity because for a number of reasons that I think that we can kind of skip over. Even though it's very important, it can be included in a later training because there's implications to this notion as well that are unexpected. Transmitted information is based on the perception of the person transferring it. It's not a direct kind of documenting of experience that you receive from a person. They form it into words and they speak it and you hear it. It's received and perceived by you or whoever is the person who's hearing what they say. This seems kind of very common sense and something that shouldn't even need to be said, is kind of how I'm feeling now. But these are things that are significant for what's coming up, and they are proven at substantial length in Science and Sanity. So information, somebody either remembers it and it affects them or it doesn't. So after they perceive it, they either get it or they don't get it. It's either impactful or not impactful. but it does, it's received and then processed by a person who receives information from another person. All right. There was a time when sorry, somebody's coming here to make a delivery. I don't know if you can hear that on the recording. There was a time when the mind and the body were considered separate. Okay, now this is something that there are really a lot of implications for, and it is super interesting and very funny, some of the observations that are made about this, because this has not always been the way it is, and that is something that is not going to be covered in this training, but it's important because it is something people use today. There's a mind-body connection. But you can be impacted by something somebody says. When you receive information, it can make you sick if it's really bad news. And going to therapy, for some people, going to talk therapy is enormously beneficial. And so it's like health, the cross where mental health and physical health, they're all the same thing. All right. And the above applies through human history. So this is the way it always was with humans, us, people as a species, I guess you might say. And it was not like another way. It wasn't, these are things that had to be proven in Science and Sanity. And like I say, could be covered in a later training because of the significance. But there are all kinds of things that we take for granted in a lot of ways because of the advancements that connected previous understandings to now being common knowledge. Okay, so we're back to leeches sucking on people, stuff like that. I mean, it was just different things were assumed, but this is what we're working with here. Okay, we are about to have the second challenge of this training. Okay, there's a map on the next page of the contiguous United States, of the 48 states. Each state is properly labeled and is the right shape and scale, and you've got 1 second to point to Chattanooga and draw a line in the air to Atlanta. Are you ready? All right. 3, 2, 1 Mississippi. Okay? So even if everything is present, all information, if the order is not relative to reality, a map becomes inaccurate even though it has accurate information on it. Okay? We're getting into, is it what it is? Territory here. If you saw this sign curving to the left and then there was a road that the sign represented curving to the right, what is reality here? It's going to the right. If you just go to the left like the sign says, you're gonna crash, And so with every sign, there's something the sign symbolizes. And whatever it symbolizes is something that really can't be named. It's reality. And the sign can be different than the symbol. Let me ask you this. These are the words, I love the library, in different codes, languages. Which one of these is more meaningful than the other? Are they different? What are the differences? They're in different languages. They're not the same words. We got the semaphore over here. The sign language is library, love, I. That's the order it comes in, which you can say libraries are what I love instead of I love the library, or this library, is loved by me, you could say. It's kind of awkward, but it means the same thing, right? So it's expressing the same message, all of these, but they're very different in the method of communication being used. So you've got signs and you've got symbols. Now, the unspeakable notion here about a feeling toward libraries, the library, is different from the words being used to describe it. Now, this may seem like the stupidest thing in the world, right? It seems so common sense. If you write a word on a piece of paper, then you can take a piece of paper right now and you can write the word library on it. Can you check a book out from that piece of paper? Come on. It's just a word. It's just a piece of paper. A word on a piece of paper. It's a sign that symbolizes something. And when you say library, people, they know what you're talking about. They think they do. There's another concern. You say the word library and people think they know what that is, but maybe they don't. Sheds a little light on, I didn't know you do that at the library, because people think they already know about it. They already know what it is. And what they have is the sign, but the symbol is different than what they think it is. And the symbol is what's important. The symbol is the reality. The feeling here, that's what is being communicated. And the words are just a tool to get that information to another person. So, it is a very important idea in general semantics that words are not what they represent. And it uses, that is to say, it being general semantics, the system, an extended metaphor of maps and places. If you have a map, it's a piece of paper. If you've got a place, it's a place, right? It's reality. And if you name it, the name is meaningless unless it's connected to a symbol. It's your sign. The maps are the signs. The places are the symbols that are the actual real places. And a sign needs to represent a symbol. Think back about that map of the United States. It had all the correctly shaped states. It had all the names, not in the right order. And because they weren't in the right order, but it was technically, in a way, the right information based on what kind of information you were looking for, it was not an accurate, so to speak, map, even though there was good information on it. And why is that? Is because the information was out of order, right? And the information was out of order because we know, everyone who's listening to this knows what reality is like in this regard. Atlanta's south, Nashville's northwest. And it don't matter what a map says, because the reality is that. They are not the places they represent. And this metaphor kind of extends in general semantics to everything, because it's at its core is kind of like a neuro-linguistic theory of knowledge that is non-Aristotelian, and a system of concepts and tools that are used to change thinking in a way that more closely represents reality. Maps, they're pieces of paper or something on your phone. They're not the things they represent. So, if that same map that had everything in the right shape, in the right place, everything in the right place, because everything's already the right shape and name, that map of the United States that was on there earlier, would it be more useful, and why? It would be, as far as you being able to draw a line from, Chattanooga approximately to Atlanta approximately. It's because the structure would be similar to reality. So maps are useful because they have a similarity to what they represent. And this extends in this metaphor, to words, of course. If you mean one thing and say another, the information that is received is whatever else you've said, even if you're trying to communicate a certain thing, because the maps are not the places that they represent. Think about the point right on this computer screen, the one you're looking at now. What would a map look like that would lead you to that point in space? All right, there's quite a bit here to unpack, and perhaps if this training is well received, we can talk about the reasons why this is not possible. But we all know this is not possible. You got a map. An accurate map is accurate enough to show you how to get to someplace. It's not accurate as in to the single spot in a three-dimensional space that exists right in front of you. But you could indeed draw a map, which would lead you, and then put up, whatever it is, a couple feet up from that point, and say, okay, this is the best you can do for an accurate map to represent what we have here. So we've got this, again, I'll say, maps, they're not the place they represent. To be useful, they must have a similar structure to what they represent. And they can never completely represent the territory that they're describing. Oh yeah, so I'll put this in here. It's just a quote from Science and Sanity. But also, this is, we were talking about 1600 earlier. So this is a map of Chattanooga. This is the very best map that you can find of Chattanooga in 1600. It's like 200 years before a map is made of Chattanooga at all. So back when Hamlet came out in 1600 and that guy was being burned at the stake, if you think of language as a map, they were using maps then that we're using now, and so much has changed. This is the map that's available of Chattanooga at that time, when the words that we're using as maps to describe ideas were established. If we reflect upon our languages, we find at best they must be considered only as maps. A word is not the object it represents. And then he starts breaking down, describing a map, showing a map of a place with a map of the place that the map, kind of like a scaled map that moves, further and further away, so the scale is smaller. It's an idea that's revisited in Science and Sanity a number of times, and we could talk about it later if there's another training like this one. Okay, this is the last concept that we are going to be talking about. Okay, so we're almost through concepts here. So I had not seen this in forever. This is something that's, in your high school math classes or earlier, depending on how old you are or whatever, how good your school was. A function is how mathematically something that's dependent upon a variable is described. So you've got something that's quantified. Like let's say, 3x plus 1, all right? Look there on the bottom one. 3x, if the 3 was multiplied by 1, it'd be 3. Plus 1, it'd be 4, right? And there's some examples of solutions here. But the variable can change, and everything changes around it. So just keep this in mind, that it's a concept that is fundamental in math, that you can have something that's unknown until it's affected by something else that is variable, okay? The output is not known until the input is known in a function. Okay, I think this is the last page. Yeah, it's the last page of concepts. Extensional versus intentional definitions. This is extensional information is like something that is anybody, it can be proven. It is something that's empirical and is supported by information that is available to everyone. And intentional definition is something that is information that you produce inferentially, so meaning not deductively. That is to say, you're taking evidence and producing an idea of what it means in kind of a logical argument, right? And so, guy walks in, raincoat, covered in water. I didn't know it was raining outside. Well, he just got sprayed by a hose, right? There's your inferential type of information versus you look out the window and you see that it's raining and you think the same thing. And somebody walks in and they're totally dry. And it's like, how in the world did that happen? But I know, even though I've got this sign of someone walking through the door who is totally dry, I know it's wet outside. That's the symbol. That's reality. A semantic reaction is when a person responds to a sign and the symbol doesn't actually match the sign. So reality doesn't actually match what's being communicated. And that can only happen when there's intentional definition. It cannot happen when there is extensional definition. So, and that's again, the person walking in covered in water, they're soaking wet, and there's that assumption that really makes a lot of sense. How could somebody get that wet? It's the most likely reason. And if you think that, when you see somebody who's wearing a rain jacket and they're soaking wet, then most of the time you're going to be right, if not all the time. Okay, in this next part, I am going to be including some examples that were part of the fiscal year 2025 engagement survey. These are some of the comments that were made, and sometimes they're little extracted pieces of a comment. this truly is, whenever we do engagement stuff, it's totally anonymous. I've got no clue who submitted these, and there shouldn't be any clue as to who. And unless you tell somebody that is yours, there's no reason why anybody would think that your anonymous comment is being used. And so that's why I feel comfortable about using this, using these couple of comments that we're going to be examining. The first one is going to explore how much time to spend with patrons. So I'll read this out. It's a long one. I notice some employees will engage in frequent, lengthy one-on-ones, often resulting in them spending more than 20 minutes with a single patron. Those patrons often return and expect each employee to spend that time with them each time they are in the library after the first occurrence. This pulls the employee away from their assigned duties and creates an expectation that all employees are supposed to assist patrons with filling out entire job applications, reading a web page, etc. Clearer expectations of our assigned duties would be great. Even basic things like collecting trash, shelving, organizing, maintaining our collection, picking up after patrons, enforcing the patron code of conduct, etc. should be defined more clearly so that all staff know they are expected to do these things. If each person has the same title of LSS, a list of expectations would be awesome so that we can serve our patrons in an equitable manner that still has appropriate boundaries. I notice this is less of an issue when managers intentionally assign each staff member an equal amount of duties throughout the day. Thank you. Whoever sent this in, I appreciate this comment. And it is sound, I'll say, that if a coworker spends a substantial amount of time, more than they should, with a patron, then that patron can develop expectations, and that's always going to happen. And then, ask for that the next time they come in and have received it before, and for it to be problematic, and the patron to be upset that if the next person is not able to do that for them, and that it could cause a problem for getting work completed. But it's sound to say that, but it's not valid because quite a few reasons. One is, if it's based on the patron coming through the door and not already being unreasonable, okay? And so that's kind of like the one that sticks out right here. So it goes on to kind of make this argument about clear expectations of assigned duties, and it's about clarity, this comment. It's kind of like, which is also not a bad idea. I don't think it's a bad idea to put, what you think that people should be doing in general as a sign, remember to do these things. That's not abnormal. It's not unreasonable. But that's not the point of why I'm bringing it up. It's the clear expectations through a list of duties doesn't make patrons more reasonable, and it also doesn't keep people from spending too much time helping an individual patron when it's not necessary. That's also something that can definitely happen. But the underlying assertion here is also that to solve this problem, there's an amount of time that could be a rule. That's what I read in this, is that people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know how much time they're supposed to be doing them. So that makes it so that they don't know how much time they're supposed to spend with a patron, and they need to bring consistency to that, to service. Be consistent in how much time you'll spend with a patron. And so false expectations won't be created. Well, we could talk about the other reasons why, like other problems around this line of reasoning. But what I really want to focus in on, because it is essential to the kind of like implied territory this person is working with, is their map says there is a certain amount of time that would work here. 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, and then clear instructions on what to do after that. Another focus here is clarity. What are clear expectations? What's clearly stated? What are we supposed to do when a patron is trying to take up too much time and we're, need to do other things? I mean, other people are setting us up for this by spending too much time with them. And so this is exploring how much time is the right amount of time to spend with patrons. Well, the answer to that question is best expressed as a function. What is the appropriate duration for helping patrons? It's an unlimited number of factors. So think about this function. It's X, the appropriate duration for helping patrons, is a function of these factors: cruciality of patron need, how busy the location is, status of assigned duties, and it goes on and on and on, which is another important general semantics kind of concept, etc. And it's an unknown but not unlimited number of factors here. And those could change in an instant when something happens and it's suddenly not the time to help patrons anymore. Some kind of dramatic thing happens. It can change everything. And so this is the amount of time. It is variable depending on all of these different factors. And it's not the person's not spending the right amount of time. Let's concede there's an employee who is helping a patron and it's unnecessary that they give them so much attention, and that's the situation. And it's known, not inferred. It's an extensional kind of thing. The person admits it. It's seen that, everybody's is just slammed, and here's a person who's like helping somebody write their fan fiction or whatever it is, and it's just outrageous. Okay, and then the person says that's true. Well, even in that situation, the issue is not that the person was not given a guideline to run by. It's that they made a bad decision. And so they made a bad decision about how to spend their work time and how much time to spend with the patron. It's a decision that's variable, and it's made every time there's a patron interaction. This is not the kind of thing I do every day, even though I do have patron interactions every day. And they're not always where I get to help the person. So one of the parts of the commenters map is that there's expectations that are set. They come in through the door, they've got unreasonable expectations, which they got because of a coworker creating those expectations for them, and so there's nothing that can be done. I'm stuck helping them, or they're going to be upset. But the truth is you can adjust the expectations by speaking with the patron. This is a universal problem. It is what it is. I was helped before. So you can either help me the way I was helped before, or a different way that is dissatisfactory. That's Aristotelian thought, okay? And so a person is already, if they are having that expectation, making a map that does not resemble reality and creating a expectation that's not unreasonable because of the expectation being unreasonable that they will have a certain amount of time spent with them. It's unreasonable because they made the expectation at all. So there's some things you could say. I'll help this other patron and be back. Let's say whatever the variable is that's popped up. This last one, maybe these are good ideas. I'd say ask your supervisor. Don't rely on this if you're really in this situation. You need to ask your head librarian, supervisor, manager, whoever else. That's the actual authority here. But this is what I would do. I would say, this looks like it's going to take a long time, and I don't have time to help you. So here, and look at the schedule and be like, you either do or do not have time later on in the day when you could meet with the person. You could ask if someone else can help them because you've got something to do. But that the person can force you to help them for a certain amount of time, or that they're making that decision even, is not true. They're only making it if you're unwilling to adjust those expectations. And they may have them because of an earlier interaction. They may not. I'll come back to that, to the first part of part 3. But now it's time to move on to some engagement survey comments. There were a lot of compensation concerns here in the engagement survey, and there are a lot of ideas that people have about compensation. And it is important to understand not only what can be read on a position classification form, which anybody can read. Go to Chattanooga.gov and you can check them all out. But what is the structure of the overall plan? This is that here's a map with everything in the right spot, but all the names are wrong. Or here's something where all the names are right, but they're all in the wrong order. kind of thing. So understanding is inferential until you're looking at evidence that's extensional, right? There's a lot of concerns. I'm not going to read these, but they revolve around people with different expectations, people who are given more expectations than other people who have the same title or pay grade. It's about doing other responsibilities that are not like on the classification. There's concerns. These are all concerns that people have that involves like the job description documents and other issues that involve job descriptions, requirements, and so forth. As you can see, there's one claim, second from the bottom. Children's programmers at the library should be compensated more as there is a lot of extra work. To say this person is making the statement that people who program for children should be paid more than any other employee who does other programming or spends more time doing other duties than working on programming. Anyways, I think that to help everybody with understanding, we should take a look at the structure as I've said. The HR department maintains a classification plan, okay? Now, the position classification forms are part of the classification plan. The classification plan provides a list of all employment positions in the city. It provides a complete inventory of all positions in the city service and an accurate description and specifications for each job classification. That is a sentence, man, I tell you what. Well, the issue, or one of the issues here, is that this says it's providing an accurate description. Now, what does accurate mean? If the classification is a construct, the classification itself, the classification description, and the job itself, each one is reality, the reality of doing the job. An accurate description has enough detail and resembles the job enough so that you can recognize it. It's like you can get to a place because the map is good enough, it'll get you there. In fact, there's some very deliberately written use of job classifications here, 10.2. These are employee information guide sections. It should be noted that these elements listed are not entirely inclusive or descriptive of all duties. So it's talking about the general description of the position, essential functions, and additional duties of the job. All right, this section goes on to say, towards the bottom, the minimum qualification standards on job classification should serve as norms for applicants coming into the job setting and should also serve as a basis for performance indicators in meeting the expectations of the city for each employment position. So they're kind of saying here that the job classifications are written from a position of when you start the job, like what you're expected to do, not what you're expected to achieve in the future as far as growing within the job that you have. It's saying this is what people are supposed to do. It's not that they're even trying to describe what's done in the jobs. Just when you begin your employment in a specific job, what are the kinds of things that are similar to what you're going to be doing? All right. Employees who believe their job duties, it's probably from the job analysis questionnaire section, employee information guide. Employees who believe their job duties vary substantially from their job description. 51% of higher level responsibility and duty, not to include increased volume or short-term stretch assignments, may request a review and assessment by submitting the request to their direct supervisor. All right, skip out of that onto uses of the classification plan. The classification plan may be used as a guide in recruiting and examining candidates for employment, in determining lines of promotion and developing employee training programs, in determining salaries to be paid for various types of work, and in providing uniform job terminology, understand, and then the rest of the sentence. Now, once you get into these documents, all that was unclear about what's going on here, because the job classifications are all organized into grades. You probably already know this, and it's probably, doesn't, it seems like I shouldn't be explaining it, but it's not that. It's the implication of this, because when it says employees who believe their job duties vary substantially from the job description, 51% of higher level responsibility and duty, That's not higher level responsibility and duty in a general sense. It's in a grade sense, a higher grade responsibility. And it's more than half of the responsibilities. So this is from the LSS classification summary. Incumbents in this classification are responsible for representing the Chattanooga Public Library by applying specialized knowledge to provide excellent internal or external customer service in assisting patrons or executing library operations. Work requires limited supervision, and here's just kind of a shot of a spreadsheet that's got all the different titles and grades, and it's right there on the 6. And there's nothing significant about the FJC Navigator. That's just where my cursor was when the screenshot happened. When it says higher level, it's not a comparison with a coworker who seems to be doing different job duties. And let me just take a minute to say, we're not talking about how things should be. Okay, I'm a city employee. You're a city employee. We're both city employees. And I'm sure that we both have, whoever is watching this, ideas about how things could be made better. This is about what's the structure of the classification plan itself as a reality compared to the map that sometimes people create of it. Okay, so grade 6, there's the description we had before, delivers excellent customer service, so helping patrons and, using common sense, critical thinking to achieve goals while improving team coherence. Okay. Let's take a look at this. These little shush emojis, that's what I'm going to be doing. If this training continues, it's what I'm going to be using as the silent level or reality level descriptor. So you've got some territories here, 2 that are met through these other documents. Okay, so you've got the actual job, individual classification description, and the rest of the compensation plan with its structure. Okay, so leading to being actually compensated. So the compensation happens through grades located in the compensation plan where an individual classification has been graded, and it's the actual job that resembles in some way the individual classification description. And this is just another reminder that it's not about I do more than this person who has the same job title, or what I do is different from this person who does the same job title. If you're helping patrons and providing library services, working in library operations, and you examine all of the different job classifications and see that there's a grade difference level responsibility that you're engaged in 51% or more of the time, then there's grounds to request an evaluation. And that's the rationale they're working with. Okay, so these are the written rules of the city here. We have got another exercise coming up. And this is higher, lower, the same. All right. And it's illustrative because it's not very straightforward at all. What I'm going to do is we've got the classification summary for library services specialist here. And these 3, they're going to kind of zoom in so you can see them a little bit better. I'm going to compare these and see if it makes sense that something is higher, lower, or the same grade as library services specialist. Okay? It's a mental exercise. You don't have to write this down or do anything. It's just consider this. All right. We've already read the library services specialist thing. It's a grade 6. Now, take a moment to read this other job classification description. Leading recreation and sports programs, children, adult, seniors, teaching, facilitating activities, administrative tasks. This goes on, as you can see, reserving spaces, assisting with research, grant writing, budget development. Represent the department this job is in for the whole city. Moderate supervision. What did you come up with? This is a lower grade job than library services specialist. There's a number of details in it where more kind of like decision making and expertise happens with providing library services than with providing these recreation services. After all, they're playing a game, and there's rules for a game, and there's no rules for providing library services. Not really. There are guidelines, and providing great customer service is like a goal, that you're trying to accomplish, as well as get the actual services provided to the patrons. And there's limited supervision. Even though your day may be scheduled, it's unstructured, and in as much as that each LSS, when they're helping a patron, chooses, for instance, how much time they're going to spend helping any individual patron. There's not somebody standing over your shoulder giving you, a nod when you just need to walk away from them, something like that, or a number of points that need to be scored for there to be a win. All right, here we go. This is a basic office functions for the homeless program, building relationships with homeless folks. These are people affected by homelessness now. Collaborating local services. And then it goes on, and there's some interesting stuff here. Driving and walking to remote homeless sites in the wilderness, under bridges, in rural and urban areas. Collecting donations of household goods. Driving to homeless service provider agencies to meet with homeless individuals and families. Building relationships. Filling out paperwork with them. Following up with them. But I think that it really stuck out at me. The walking to remote sites in the wilderness. All right, take a shot. Higher, lower, or the same? It is the same. This is the same grade as a library services specialist. Handling people. And I know everybody who's listening to this interacts with unhoused folks every day. And this is primary function of this homeless outreach specialist, and I'm glad they're doing work. Walking out into wilderness sites and under bridges and stuff seems, it's an expectation that is within the grade of library services specialists. So if this were something where it was suddenly said, we should walk to the wilderness and go to a homeless site and talk to the people there, that would not be activity that is based on the structure of the compensation plan unreasonable or should require additional compensation from a library services specialist classification. All right, here's the third one. Responsibility for technical and or administrative support for department or senior staff, assist department special projects, monitor workflow, office processes, very generalized information. It's actually even less kind of like specific about what this person is doing. But it could also mean they could be doing almost anything. Higher, lower, the same. This one is higher. This is admin support coordinator. We have two of these positions at the library. One of them is filled and the other one is vacant pending a reversion rights period. And here in a few months it'll be available. And these are kinds of the things that I've got as expectations for whoever is in that position, kind of what they're going to do. Kind of read through this. These are lines, the last 3 lines there. This is a position that in our office here downstairs is going to support the entire library, okay? And my expectation is that understanding and competence will be achieved in a way where when there's a situation nobody's ever seen before, the person doing this job is going to be able to analyze that and produce a solution rather than asking someone else what they think. I mean, that's great. You can always do that. But how to move forward is not something I'm really expecting to be asked. Is this the right way forward with this problem? That would be kind of the expectation of what I would see. And this is something that they'll have never seen before and there's no instructions for. And that's a grade 7 position. And again, if that sounds like something you're interested in, it's going to be available for recruitment here in about 2.5 months. Sometimes a person can have map territory misalignment, and it can be caused by a totally reasonably inferred information set leading to a completely valid reasonable suggestion supported by valid arguments, that won't solve the problem because of a general misunderstanding of reality, not because of a mistake in their reasoning, right? There is a 2,000-year institutionalized way of thinking that fights clear thought, okay? If a person taking an Aristotelian route were to say, it is what it is, something's either this or this, it's that or that, this is this, those kinds of statements, but the words that they say and the thoughts that they have can never really represent reality, then it is in fact not true that it is what it is. It is not. And it can be hard to grasp. It's also really hard to explain. I can tell you this training right here is a lot of original work, and there's a lot more to these concepts. It's just kind of scratching the surface. No thing is isolated. That's a little Easter egg for if the training continues and a person looks back on this. So, and this is something that is a concern. It's kind of written out and wordy here, but it's possible someone has an idea and identifies a problem and it's reasonable, and they speak to their manager about it or report it, and the manager also thinks it's reasonable, but there's a disconnect because the problem really seems impossible to solve because the solution that's offered, when executed, is not going to result in a solution, or the solution that's suggested is actually not possible because it relies on a very black and white kind of like view of reality. It's either this or this, and that's almost never going to be true. So there is more in Science Insanity, and there would be more in additional training if anybody was interested in taking two different flawed maps and putting them together and comparing them, and how to work your way through that involves abstraction awareness, which is a concept not covered at all in this training or even introduced. And then there's some more tools that really, in general semantics, you've got your concepts and how you understand them, and then you have tools that are shortcuts so that you can recognize when the concepts are in play. That's at least what I think about how the structure of the system works. And what I think can never be a full representation of the silent level. I'm going to take a minute to speak on an example of impossible solutions. So clarity is something that's requested earlier example, but really throughout I'm looking throughout these two issues that we were looking at. Okay. I'm looking for a clear job description with a clear explanation of what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm looking for clear guidance, and that looks like this. And I'm seeking clarity, and I'm asking I'm asking for a very reasonable thing here by seeking clarity, and things should be simple. And, I don't understand why management is not providing that for me. It's very simple. Spend this many minutes with a person. You do this and this and this and this. That's what you're expected to do today. All of those things. Sometimes people can get upset because they're not getting what they expect. And that is also map territory misalignment, because the function that describes how much time you should spend with a patron, that is clarity. That is as clear as it can be explained what's supposed to happen, because it's the closest, at least that I can think, decision making. So to say it's totally unclear what you put here, I need a certain number of minutes. A certain number of minutes would be just a falsehood. Some guidance that involved some simple explanation of the pay plan, or it is indeed an issue and you should be upset because everything that you do is not on your job description. This explanation is not intended to upset anyone, but it's meant to help everyone, because providing the clarity here of for some people who have an expectation that because they do something different that's harder than someone else, they should be compensated more. I'm not arguing that's right or wrong. What I'm saying is, and have said, is that your expectation doesn't have anything to do really with the way that compensation works at the City of Chattanooga, if that's your rationale. And so if you're upset because that's the case and you think that nothing's being done about it, it's because based on that information, there's nothing that can be done. We don't make those decisions. The Human Resources Department does. And they've given guidance, and it's not simple. And so I just wanted to say that sometimes when people have an expectation of communication, this is what's happening. There's no clearer answer than the one they've gotten, and they think that everything should be simple and easy to understand. And things are just not simple. Reality is not simple. You can remove information until you have got a false solution to the problem, and then just do that and see how that works when someone comes in and they have got an urgent problem where they need help or whatever else might be the case. And you're staring at your watch talking about a certain number of minutes, and then you need to do this type of thing. I hope this doesn't come across, again, as obscuring, because it's intended to be helpful. And I hope some people at least think that it was. This is a very limited partial overview of general semantics, and I really need you to take the survey because there's several different ways that training and the library operations compendium could go, and it kind of depends upon whether or not this is an appreciated approach or if everyone's seeking something else. And that's like the subject of the survey. It's not like a quiz about all this information. In fact, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, there's nothing being asked of anyone who has taken this training. You don't even have to remember it, but please think about it.